Welcome to the Claims Underground podcast with your hosts, Corey Locke and Troy Willis, where we help policyholders just like you understand your policy and how to navigate through an insurance claim. We advocate for homeowners as well as businesses when insurance companies won't pay. So if you're tired of getting the runaround and ready to find out what's really going on, then let's get down to business and learn from the insurance claims experts, Corey Locke and Troy Willis.
Hey, welcome to Claims Underground. Appreciate having you back. My name is Troy Willis. I'm a licensed public adjuster. My co-host here is Corey Locke, who's also a licensed public adjuster. I am also a retired builder, expert witness, certifications in IRCRC, and a few others to go along with it. Mold certification, blah, 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 blah. Mr. Locke here is going to present his resume as well and kind of give you a little bit about him before we get into this segment. So you at least have an idea that we might have a little bit of knowledge of what we're talking about here. So Corey, let's get it. What's that background?
Well, I've been doing this about 35 years. I've been a property estimator for 30. I am triple mastered IICRC for mitigation. I'm AC smoke and fire expert. I now have a moisture testing certification. I'm an expert witness qualified in state and federal court. I'm also qualified to write large loss. And so today we're going to be talking about a few things. But the first thing we're going to talk about is something I think you've been using on the front side of your adjustments quite a bit in your push in California. And it's the California Welfare and Institutions Elder Abuse, Financial Elder Abuse. Now, Troy, the big thing that we hear about this is elder abuse, but we don't know what the pieces of it are. Where does this get found in the California Welfare and Institutions Code?
It's a section called 15610.27, as we refer to it. 15610.27 is the code that it refers to as elder abuse. It's an elder abuse act. It talks about the physical abuse, the financial abuse, the neglect, the abandonment, and things of that nature. It also gives what is required to be considered under elder abuse. Was the carrier willfully doing something to, guide the claim in a way that it shouldn't have been guided, which is bad conduct, knowingly that the insurer was an elder. That's definitely one way of proving that. Breach of contract, or improper contract is another issue. Elders have to be at least 65 years or older.
Right.
And one of the advantages that I like using it is because the damages amount, when we build a claim and we look at a claim, and many times people will look at it as public adjustment and go, it's not enough money here, I don't want to run after it. And they leave people hanging. And that's never been our motto. Our motto was, to help the people and see if we can be a benefit to a loss. And that's what we do first. And then my second objective when I look at if I can be a benefit to the loss is, can I set this file up for litigation just in case it goes north and we don't get no further in the push? So That's every claim that I come across. So when it comes to these type of claims with elders, I normally take a claim and see where it starts to where I can build it to. So give an idea that many times it can be as much as 4 times the amount of damages that you are claiming. And so, if you put together a $250,000 claim, you're about to run in there almost $1 million plus into a lawsuit. Many people don't know that, treble fees get involved in this to where, the insurer becomes liable sometimes for attorney fees when it's under elder abuse. And, sometimes if an insured loved one dies, they could be responsible to pay, for pain and suffering as well, just under the vicarious liability principles that they have to, oblige by. So there's a whole lot of factors that go into play with this elder abuse. And it's kind of a mandatory thing as a public adjuster. You should make note that when you represent a client that's an elder, that you acknowledge and make that clear to the insurance company that this is an elder. That's
right off the bat. You and I have been doing this. That we'll come on, we do the assessment, we push in, and present the demand. And at, either then or before then, we're saying we're needing you to know, because maybe you didn't see this, maybe you weren't aware. This is an elder. We need you to be
Mm-hmm.
aware that there are special statutes in the state of California that elder abuse can be financial elder abuse. You don't have to be beating
Mm-hmm.
them physically. You could be beating them financially.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some components to this of emotional distress. There has to be some sort of, are you, distressed? Quite honestly, if you're an elder and someone's holding you hostage for money, you will be distressed.
Stress.
And if you have a bill that someone's saying I won't pay, and the insurance company's saying that's too much, and we're not going to pay any more than we're going to tell you, that's financial abuse. That's an
Right.
elder abuse. So I'm sure there are other people who'll take umbrage that we are saying this, but quite honestly, guys, if you have a policyholder that has been with you for 40 years, you need to wake up. If they've been with you for 40 years, likely they started in their mid 20s, they will be more than 65 years of age, and
Absolutely.
that's triggering elder abuse. Uh,
Absolutely.
we had a situation, and you have too, but recently I had a situation where I had some elders and they were getting pushed around by a carrier. Fortunately, the carrier, saw the light and is offering coverage and will not probably be a problem. But I had to give them a heads up at the very beginning. I don't think I've been on this claim any more than 30 days. And I had to give them the heads up. Oh, by the way, there is a statute. If you're contemplating denial, a denial fast forwards this into big problems. You're denying the financial resources that they've been paying for with a policy. Not only do you have elder abuse, you have breach of contract, you have emotional distress, a lot of things that go into this. And when you mentioned treble damages, that is, we have the amount of the loss, and usually, let's just say it's $250,000 by your example. It's $250,000 plus four times that,
Mm-hmm.
more than $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then the attorneys get attorney fees, public
Fees.
adjusting fees, emotional distress. This can mount up really fast. So
And some additional damages. I've even heard how some have applied in there as well. Just again, it by giving that recognition and understanding to the carrier, it puts them on front to kind of start the process more reasonable than unreasonable. You would hope. Not all the time it does, but as you see, I mean, we defend a lot of elderly people, just taken advantage of out here by the carriers and by mitigators and contractors of that nature. But it's something that I think more people need to be aware of out here, because it's one thing we sit here and talk about insurance policies, but we at this point it's time to start addressing how to even protect the ones that's purchasing these insurance policies. I know we kind of left out there to defend for ourselves at our age group, but California protects seniors. They're very protective over senior rights and things of that nature. They've learned that seniors are living longer now through some studies, and they find that they're going to be here a lot longer. So they're making a lot more ways to protect them. I've seen it as more of a benefit more than anything when it comes to claims that they're elders. But sometimes it takes for it to go to litigation. As we know, they'll drag it out to the day it hits the court steps, and then they'll settle. Most of them never even go to court. That's the crazy
right.
part, that they hold them hostage to go through all this process to settle before court. And that way they do that too, to prevent from paying those fees, of course, if they found guilty of what they've done. And many times, as we know, not only will they come up with some type of settlement, they may have them sign a release or do a white waiver to pretty much make it go away. So you ain't telling people about what we did to you, but we made you. Now I ain't gonna say they made them whole. They gonna allege they made them whole in their eyes, but it never makes people whole. It never
No, not at
changes
all.
what they went through. you know they've watched their loved ones suffer. I have a client who's still is still dealing with the insurance company, and is going to litigation. And this gentleman is 100% disabled, and his daughters are taking care of him 100%. And that case is one of the ones that drive me, because they denied him coverage for loss of use at the beginning of his claim. And after fighting and convincing them to go from over $5,000 to over $100,000 plus, it takes them to say, okay, we'll pay for it once the construction starts. You still want to be complicated to this elder. And when they asked for a chairlift, which is already in his home, you denied it. when he asked for a bath seat, which is already in his home that's part of what was damaged, you denied it. And the worst part that came to me when I took on this claim, and this was one that made me really consider taking it. They told the gentleman that he can stay in another part of the room while the construction was going on. Now
Another
this
part of the
house got
house.
and the house got mold in it. It has, they didn't come in and do an inspection for months. The house has mold in it, and the ceilings are cat collapsing, the floors are buckled, water damage throughout many of the rooms. I mean, it's unreal. And you believe, hey, you can just stay in another room. And I wonder sometime, and we joke about this, but would you put your mother in another room? Would you put your grandparents in another room? If your grandparents had a claim, would you accept that adjuster telling them that they can go sleep in another room under these conditions? When in fact, he's been paying these people for over 40, 50 years. That's the truth of the matter. And now he has this claim that's really not that large. And yet, the best you can do is dispute everything. And, again, you lowball them. It's so low, even the settlement we got is still not put us where we need to be. That's why it's a
Right.
pre-litigation. And so, these are the concerns that, concern me about many of these elders that I help represent, even down to, I mentioned about the claim earlier that, a small from a tree to debris, and yet you only pay $370. I mean, it doesn't even matter how big it is. It's just the audacity and the being malice about treating somebody like that in a way is just wrong. I mean, it's wrong. Some of the verbiage they use to some of the elders, it's wrong. I've had an elder told before, man, that you had no business going to the hotel without getting our approval. You could have got a mattress. That's what he told her. I know you're gonna notice because that's the place where the gas burnt my face. The fumes were so bad in this house. It was making her son bloody nose, and yet you told her that you could have he said this, you could have got an air mattress from Walmart and slept in the dining room. It was raw sewage in the house.
I had that same conversation. It was so funny you mentioned that, and it's that one that we really remember. But I have another client that was just telling me today. They were saying we walked into our house and we had 4 inches of standing water. And when we called the insurance company, the intake person is saying, "Well, we only pay for housing if your house isn't livable, and it might be inconvenient, but you can go sleep upstairs."
I got
Really?
one of them right now.
Really, guys?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine that you reasonably allowed that to come out tumbling out of your mouth. You have 4 inches of standing water. You're being told by the mitigation company this is category 3 water, which is black water, which is injurious to life and health. And so you're being told by this person that your house is only, you can only get ALE coverage, additional living expense coverage for a hotel if your house is damaged to the point where it's not livable. It's inconvenient that you got water all over the floor and the first floor where you have your master bedroom and both bathrooms, but you can walk up the stairs and go sleep upstairs.
That's what it's like with one of my claims now. They actually just had a brand new baby and they had to bring their baby home to that condition. That was upsetting as can be when I heard it. And these people have been taken advantage of like crazy. And we've even brought the lawyer in and they've ignored some of the letters that went out to from the attorney. And I finally had a conversation with the manager over the adjuster because the adjuster would always take my emails and just kind of like, I don't understand this. And I'm just go say some generic answer. So finally I got in touch with a manager who called me back. And she came off a little hostile at first. And it was kind of interesting. You come off hostile and you treating the client like this. And within about 3 or 4 minutes, that hostile got, it got calmed down. I mean, it was definitely escalated down. And I had a conversation with her about some real issues. And what was most concerning to me, and this was a manager that said this, she says, my adjuster's been bringing me these insurance code violations that you said we are violating. She says, and I don't even know what it is, Mr. Willis. I had to write them down on a sticky note, and I got to look them up. Now, as long as I've been in this industry, this is a manager that made this comment to me, I mean, I would have never said this if I was a manager. And first of all, so our people understand that every year you're supposed to certify that you understand the California Fair Claims Act
Every year.
on their part every year. And the California Fair Claims Act is insurance codes that dictate the way this claim should be handled outside the insurance laws that are dictated from the Department of Insurance. And so it amazes me because some of the things that they're in violation of are the same common sense request is given almost on a daily request. A 2071 request for claim related documents. You get that all the time when there's a PA or a lawyer on it. So
Every
why
time.
wouldn't you know this? A 2051 that you got to restore them back to pre-loss condition. How do you not know that? That is like the most infamous thing in the whole insurance industry and law about you got to put them back to pre-loss condition minus depreciation. I don't get where no matter what it was, except for the fact that they know they got to respond every 30 days. They blown every violation I could possibly tell you. That's the truth.
Mhm.
I mean, you can just go down the line. Of the Fair Claims Act, I think it was a 16 of them, if I'm not mistaken, 14,
Right.
16 of them.
Seven,
They blown like 8 of them.
790.03 are the
8.
basic Fair Claims Act, and within that, in California, it basically says you can't lowball them, you can't not restore them pre-loss condition. You have
That's
to,
right.
immediately start your investigation, but no longer than. You have to respond to every question that is reasonably anticipated to need an answer. You must do that within 15 calendar days. It's not,
Mhm.
work days, calendar days. There's a lot of obligations that go in order to be an adjuster here in California. They do not make it easy to be an adjuster in California by the
Absolutely.
standards of which you're tested. And,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of get out of jail understandings that, you might not know anything, but you can go work for a company, and that company has obligations to monitor and manage you. And yet now they're even not even doing that. Now they're saying, well, we don't have to do that. We have that temporary person sitting in State Farm and
Mhm.
Geico and USAA. We don't have to monitor them. But,
Mhm.
okay, guys, you're just making stuff as you go. Um, I think what I wanted to mention about this was also we talked about elders, but the statute also talks about disabled. You don't have to just be elder, 65. The statute also applies to disabilities. So if you are someone that's not 65, but you're disabled, it's the same kind of welfare and institutions obligations and protections. If you have a child of special needs and you've made them aware they have a child of special needs, that's a disability.
Mhm.
That's a disability that also
Mhm.
attaches with these same obligations and ramifications that if you're not paying attention. I have a client that I'm taking on, I'm seeing tomorrow, and this is a child of special needs, probably autistic, and they're still being making them live in a house that had a fire damage and had a subsequent water damage, and they're still making them stay in that house. Now, that's uncalled for. They were good enough to pay their policy. They were good enough to pay on time. They were good enough to report the loss and work with you and cooperate, but you're not good enough to do right by them. This is unjust. I had a response today of something I've been chasing for. I think you and I had talked about this many times. I've been chasing this for probably close to 20 months on a state declared catastrophe, and I have been chasing them with 2071 requests, which is the claims related documents obligation. This is not just something that's not written into policies. If you have a California policy, you have a California endorsement that tells you everything that's required. Actually, within this policy, it says if you need claims related documents, make the request. We have to give it to you within 15 days. It includes all reports, diagrams, estimates, bids, anything that is used to determine either the coverage or the payment. And what have I heard for the umpteenth time, especially today, from a supervisor in the claims
Well,
department?
proprietary.
We don't give you our work product. My friend, you don't understand your job. My friend, you have to read the English language and comply with the obligations of this state of California. And I explained that to them, but that's our work product. I'm sorry, friend. You have been misled. You need to come to the light and read the obligations and understand that there are things that we put forward to you that by our license you have to follow that obligation. There's an interesting thing that we're going to talk about in the next segment, but I wanted to make you aware that there are likely ethical requirements for anyone that lists a license. If you have a license as an engineer, you have an ethical requirement of having that license. If you have an adjuster's license, you have an ethical requirement that pairs with that. There are a lot of ethical requirements that go with a license. And so when you're looking and the adjuster or supervisor is something and is listing their license number, you need to say, don't you have an ethical requirement to treat me well, to treat this correctly, and not by your self gain? That's the ethical requirement. The ethical requirement is you put the other's needs ahead of your own.
Absolutely. You could have said that better. That's the fact of the matter. It used to be back in the day when and carriers didn't do the things they're doing today. If a person called in a claim, they used to help you look for coverage and see if they could find coverage to make you whole versus what we do now. It's gotten to the point that every claim is no longer handled that way. It's more of a negotiation now of what we could come to that makes everybody happy, not what is required to put you back to pre-loss, but what would make everyone happy to go away. The biggest flaw I see in that is that because they use so many seat fillers and so many people who is not experienced in what they're doing, they always look for the worst companies out here to help them commit the lowball fraud. You know, I mean, we know they'll do it and they'll just come in numbers that makes absolutely no sense. You know, like I got a 134,000 dry out. We sent it to a third party out in Florida, which how much sense does that make you right here in California? But we're gonna send it to a third party in Florida. They ain't never ever did a job in their life, not one job. They just do peer review. Here comes the best part. And they have the audacity to advertise on their website that they've handled more than 22,000 claims, mitigation reviews, right? Watch this, Corey. And they had $246 million worth of claims that they reduced 30.33% down over the year.
Okay.
Now let's look at that for what it
Yeah.
is for real.
We know what that is, don't we?
Only the reduced down number we gonna show that and you're bragging about it, and we see that all the time though. And the big fuss get to be you're 3,600 miles or more away. You've never seen the loss. You never stepped out on it, and yet you're telling some professional with a license because you don't have a license, not to mention that they're wrong. And this company don't have any license here in California for a contractor's license, a non-specified license, nothing. They have nothing here whatsoever. They've never done a job. They do no renovations. And the insurance company is using these kind of companies to say, hey, this is our estimate, push back.
That's an interesting point because there's 2 points to that. Not everyone, but the ones that we're familiar with and we've seen. There's a monetization of that. There is an incentivization to that. That company that's reviewing the bill likely, possibly, may actually be paid based upon the percentage that they drop the bill. They are paid based upon how much they drop the bill. So if you're incentivized to cut this bill because your payment to your company is based upon how much you cut out of that, how is that fair? How is that right and just? The answer, it's not. The other piece of that, you have to start looking at who owns that company. Who owns that reviewing company? It's not unlikely that that reviewing company is owned by an independent adjusting company. So the independent adjusting company is now referring to in-house to its other entity of which they are collaborating to make money, and that other entity within their company structure is incentivized to cut the bill and be paid for it.
That's a problem.
That's self-dealing. If we were ever self-dealing with our license, we would no longer have a license.
Look, that's one of the reasons that the state cap what our referral fee is, and it's so low. It makes people kind of look at you funny, like, what? That's it? But everybody ain't doing things the wrong way. Many people do things the right way.
Right.
And, unfortunately, there's those regulations that's supposed to regulate that. It does between us. Like, a PA can't be a contractor. You'll stand your ground on that. A public adjuster can't be a contractor, but you won't stand your ground on these, independent adjusting companies having these additional companies and outsourcing the work to themselves. We've seen, one of the things that we know that we should share with the people too, that many of these independent adjusters that get these incentives or get paid to handle your claim, they don't get paid until they close the claim. So, for everybody to know this is important. Why is that? Because that becomes bugaboo time. I'm going to bug you with an email every day. You should get an email from me. And you got to respond to my emails. You got 15 days. So we can do this every day because I'm not going to accept this. I'm going to keep flooding your emails and keep flooding you to come back to reinspect, but I would never allow you to close my claim. And you can't get paid for quite to the statute run out at least. I think that's the way to drag some of these adjusters through the mud that's doing this. Some of these independents and some of these companies that's coming out doing that. And I think it's an option, at least, I should say. As I kind of learned this during our MBA program, they would call it corporate espionage. Well, I'm just going to, flood you with paperwork to just keep you doing everything that you just outside of your job and trying to keep up, and that cost is just astronomical over time. So outside of reading that policy, don't accept no for an answer. Kind of knowing a little bit about the adjuster may not help, might not hurt none. Because again, if it's the independent adjuster, he's waiting to get paid when he closes your claim. Some independent firms, because I work with a couple, they'll pay even along by months is how they normally do it. The bills are sent in on a monthly basis with your timesheets and everything. And so they'll make those payments on a monthly basis. But as we find in many of them, because they reduce down even real staffing that knows something about some adjusting to just anybody now. I mean, people just, and I'm not knocking Chick-fil-A, I love it to death, but I don't want the Chick-fil-A fryer just frying fries to be my adjuster. And that's what's going on out here in many places. We're seeing it online that people say, hey, I got my license. I'm leaving Chick-fil-A. Oh my God. That is scary. That is really scary. You got a fiduciary responsibility here. You telling me that you went from a fryer to an adjuster and you've never read a policy a day in your life. That does not work. But it's just one of the type of things that, to me, a better understanding of what's going on here for our elders and for people knowing their policies. And I know we reiterated a million times on every show, read your policy, because that's the most important part of this. No matter what we say to people, it won't help you unless you understand what your benefits are. One of the first things we ask you for when we get a call in about a claim is we ask you for your policy. And we tell you clearly, we will really read your policy. The whole thing. We don't want just the declaration page. If you don't have it, that's fine. We can request it. But for the most part, we can look and see what forms is on the deck page to know, because we've read them enough to know what goes into play. But we know, as one carrier just mentioned they got over 70 forms in their policy. That's a lot of different coverages for exclusions and for coverages that was already excluded as well. So it's so important that reiterate that over and over. And I think almost every show is something we should drill in everybody's head, is to read your policy, auto, home, any policy you have, to know what your rights and benefits are. And
And
this
you don't have to
outside of
know
that,
it. And you don't have to understand it. You just have to now read it and then start asking questions. And the fastest the thing you're going to find out is that your adjuster doesn't know anything.
I
I,
know.
I don't understand this. Please explain this to me. In California, they do. They have to help you. When you ask for help, saying, I don't understand this, please explain this to me. And they say, I'll get back to you. And then you get the copy and paste of your entire policy. And that's supposed to be the answer. You're supposed to go back to them and say, I'm sorry. I'm not understanding. Can you clarify this for me? I need to really understand this. Can you clarify? Well, I gave you a letter. Yeah, but that's not a clarification. That's just you copying and pasting. I need to understand how this applies to my claim. How can I get more money out of my policy to pay for damages that I've already told you about? Well, you just have to give me a receipt. Well, how does that work? What do I show for verification? Very quickly, you're going to find the person that you're talking to doesn't know diddly. They've never
Absolutely.
read the policy. They're fronting on you. They are a Chick-fil-A former employee, and they've got a certification that means very little, that they know how to add and subtract and figure square feet and a few other things. But as far as training as an adjuster, unfortunately, the profession of adjusting has just been gutted by
Totally.
people that are not trained. We have seat fillers and posers and fronters that are sitting in those seats that know nothing. And their whole purpose of having a job now is to front and basically obfuscate how the process works. And basically, if they're saying to you anything verbally and they won't put it in writing, you absolutely know now that they're just fronting.
Now that's a fact. I'm glad you brought that to the table because that's so critical to realize that, I've had some customers lately where they've gotten so fed up with with the carrier that they tell them, I won't even talk to you no more on the phone. Put it all in emails. Um, it's important to have it documented. That's something everybody should understand because
But
that's your proof.
But those guys are being told, don't put it in writing, just call the client. I mean, perfect example, you were saying about, my daughter, she would send an email and the adjuster would pick up the phone and leave a message. And she
Yep.
goes, I don't know how to do this. I said, that's very simple. Thank you very much for your phone call. I received that. You told me the following, and then now I dismiss what you said because this is not on point. So every single phone call that you get, guys, you're
Yes, sir.
sending a responsive email. You're building your understanding. It doesn't matter if there's no verification for it, but if you do, just from what I tell people, allow, if you see that number coming in, allow them to leave a message. You're building a case. If they're going to leave a message because they need to note the file that I told someone something, and they put that in their file, they're going to leave you a message.
That's right.
Okay. Then forward that to your email and just now make that part of the claim. We all have iPhones. We all have the ability to forward in our voicemails to the actual email, and then just email the adjuster. Thank you for your voicemail. I've just left it attached, and what you've told me in this attached voicemail is the following, and that's totally incorrect.
And that's how you build that side of the case. It's
You build
something
it
you said a few minutes ago that was interesting too. You said, which is factual here, they're obligated to explain your policy to you.
right,
And one of the things that, again, fighting back on that issue, going back to 790.03H, one of the factors in there is misleading a insured on what their coverages are. And
right,
many people don't know here in the state of California, you can sue an adjuster for misleading you on a claim, which is, again, it can put them in a hot seat as well. So there's a lot of different factors and laws here that allow us to go different directions sometimes with our pushback because we understand too that we hold these adjusters liable. And it's funny how you say a lot of them won't put it in emails because that's the truth. I mean, even talking with the attorneys, we go over some of these cases and they go, if you could just get them to say this and get this manager, and most of them will say, hey, the managers that got so smart for getting burned over the years, they'll never put it in writing. They'll just tell the adjuster, you say it, and that's usually how it go. Well, I was told this is all they're gonna do, and you don't get it that way. I'm seeing some things that has been a good push, even with the elder side, is that we've done this for a minute, you and I, is that we looking for the hierarchy and within the companies,
oh yeah,
looking for the vice presidents of these claims to handle those claims, not just the manager. It's for some reason in our mind, it's like the fallacy that it's a 10% overhead, 10% profit in contract. And that's a fallacy. There's no such thing as that. Somebody made that up and they just took and ran with it. There's nothing in writing that indicates that. And
never. There isn't anywhere.
right, what I mean? And a lot of this is the same way with things that they say and they do and they tell you. And you know, it's so much stuff that's false. And it's up to you though, too, to go and look at that policy. It's kind of like with the gentleman I told you that's disabled. They said, well, he don't have mold coverage in his home, and yet I had to point out, if you read page 17, I had to go all the way and break it down. This is your policy is under California endorsement that says they do have coverage for up to $10,000. And the response was, we don't have to give you anything that's our work product. What did that got to do with what you just said? I mean, we wasn't talking about a work product. We're talking about this specific mold issue. He never once would respond to the fact that that endorsement was in there because he refused to read the policy. He knew he set the pace in several emails stating that it's not covered. You don't have coverage, not even coverage for the loss of use. The home has to be inhabitable. Let's look at this. 2 bedrooms is totally destroyed. Floors are buckled, ceiling caved in, the ceiling caved in on the bed and everything. And it's mold in them. And then you go downstairs in the living room, the recreation room, and the partial of a family room, and you got mold all on the walls and water damage that has to be addressed, and carpet that has mold in it as well. And a roof that's leaking. And the insulation upstairs in the attic is also wet. And they say that is habitable. To whom? And this is an elder. This is not only an elder, but a disabled gentleman. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm almost sure, I think he's a veteran as well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too. And we need to make just kind of an underlined effort to say, just because it has mold on it doesn't mean the mold coverage triggers. And what we like to say is, if the loss is going to require that to be torn out, that doesn't fall into the mold coverage. The mold coverage is specifically for mold that has no other bearing on other things. Let's just say that you have a water loss and the water has damaged the ceiling, walls, carpeting, whatever. All of those areas, the walls, ceiling, carpet, are all coming out anyway. It's part of the loss. And so what's left over that is not part of the loss, let's just say that it's the studs showing mold. Well, guess what? You can sand and put down a mold spray on that, and that smallest portion of the claim to take care of actually the mold that's left over after you take out everything else that is related to the water loss, then that's mold. That's a mold endorsement. But what I'm seeing is that adjusters go, well, shit, we got to take out all this stuff and it's got mold on it. So you only have $5,000 for coverage, and the rest is absorbed by your deductible. And here's your $5,000. Have a good day.
Right.
Nope.
It's happening often. Usually and the worst part is when most insureds call in and say they have mold, they already told they just did no coverage. Without no coverage. You don't have any coverage for that.
What happens in a fire loss when the fire happens? The fire department puts hundreds of thousands of gallons into a building, house, whatever, floods it just to put out the fire, and you walked in there, it's like the frickin' rainforest. Everything's burned, everything's soaking. Well, what happens when that doesn't get removed? Under right, you're going to have mold. Under the right conditions, you're going to have mold within hours. If it within 12 to 36 hours, you're going to have mold. Depending upon the outside, inside temperatures, if you're living in a very humid, hot climate, you're going to get mold in hours. That happens. I've never heard of someone saying to me after a very extensive fire loss, well, you only have $5,000 in mold. That's the funny thing. They never talk about mold in a fire loss. They only talk about mold in a water loss.
In a water loss, that's true.
Never in a fire loss. And so the question is asked, if this was a fire loss, would you be talking to me about mold, or would you just say it's all going to come out anyway? Well, this is all going to come out anyway. Well, then we're on the same page, right? All this stuff is coming out anyway, so we're not going to talk about mold until after it's all said and done. And I still see traces of mold on the framework that had to be sanded. That small part of sanding and putting down the microbial solution on top of that, that's mold. That's the mold endorsement. Everything else is just the reasonable expectation of what comes out after a covered loss.
Now, would you have that mold tested for airborne spores after you finish cleaning it?
Potentially, if you have a localized, a release of water, and you have a concern about whether there is contaminables within the water, and whether or not that became aerosolized or enough that it now went into the duct system. But then you're going to start having questions about coverage. You're going to start having questions about causation. And what I'm referring to is, if you have something that's on the floor but doesn't affect the ceiling or walls or roof, then if you start talking about mold, they're going to start applying that mold coverage to things that like your HVAC system or your HVAC and say, well, if you're alleging that the mold spores just kind of walked all the way across and went up from the floor to the ceiling, that's all well and good. You have a $5,000 limit, and that's all we're going to pay you for any part of that. There's two ways that cuts. It cuts two ways on that. But if you're just looking at the structural affect or even the other cover aspect of drywall, paint, wallpaper, flooring, subfloor, all of those things come out after a water loss anyway, as long as they're affected and you can't do a reasonable repair on any part of that. That's not what caused that to become out. That's not mold. Mold didn't cause that to become a part of your loss that has to come out. That was the water and
Right, that was after effect.
whatever categorization of water that was, 1, 2, or 3.
I have some clients right now, new clients who had a water leak, and we did an interview with them actually on the podcast live at their home. And the interesting part is that not to get this into a mold issue completely, but the interesting part of it was that an abatement company had to come in because there was it was hot on the drywall and hot on the tiles. But in some rationale that they did, they removed some of the drywall, not all the drywall, and then they left some of the edge. Oh no, then this gets better. Then they get to the kitchen and there's mold in the kitchen on the wall. So they left it. We ain't touching the mold. Okay, you're an abatement company, but you won't touch mold. So the insurance adjuster called them back and said, no, I'm gonna give you permission to go do it. He can do that. He can just tell you to go abate a substance that you don't go for it. So they go back out there and they go in the kitchen and they cut the drywall, which is asbestos now, hot, and they left it uncapsulated. They didn't do anything to seal it. Now, the best part is they go behind that and get an air clearance. How did you get an air clearance? So some said to me, because you're talking about this, that's what brought this up. So, and I told the insurance that I'm gonna test this house for mold, and I tested the studs where that mold originally was.
Mm-hmm.
The lab results came back 500x.
That's a little much. That's a little much.
I had a conversation with the adjuster just a couple days ago because we're trying to help them with housing, and we found a great deal compared to what they were being charged that would allow to house them and their pets. And we called him, and he was kind of sitting to it, so I had to kind of pep him up. What's going on? We need to know what's going on. And I had to explain all this to him that the scope is all wrong for one. I don't know if it was done before the mitigation was done. 2, this is going to be about 6 months out the home, not to mention. And 3, you have an air clearance over here, but you have mold present at a level that's ridiculous. How'd that happen? And he froze on the phone. He had nothing for me, Corey. He said, I'll go ahead and approve the housing. That's it. I guess
Thank you very much.
The rest of it. But, and again, it was ridiculous because some of the companies that we see that was allegedly helping these people, we find you're not helping them really with housing.
Right.
I mean, I'm not going to give the whole story, but I mean, you gave these people a price. It's listed online. You can't miss it on Airbnb. But the paperwork come back almost doubled up. I mean, it was almost $17,000 to move these people into a house temporarily, just the move-in cost. How unrealistic is that? And yet, when I called the company up to say, what, why, and how could you come to this? This is where their response was. Well, we got another bid that's lower. We sent it to them. No, you didn't. And I already talked to them. You didn't. But the question to me is, why did you send them the higher bill? That's the first question to me. Because you and this owner got something going on that y'all was gonna work it out. I mean, $1,700 a month for temporary furniture. They can buy all the furniture they need. It's not what do you really need that you? I mean, of course, you ain't gonna go buy a $4,000 bed for a temporary house, but I mean, it's just principle how they applied this, and they came up with all these fees that they had nothing to do with it, and you go, wow, and you call yourself helping somebody. A $9,000 security deposit. No justification. And in saying all this, they might not have been elders in this claim, but can you imagine that this is what clients go through? So if you are elder you would be going through something like this? We see it all the time.
We see it all the time.
And what's really the solution to it? I'd say, to wrap this up, I think that, again, reading that policy, of course, and understanding your benefits and understanding the laws of elder abuse is critically important. Not to let somebody allow them to do anything to your loved ones. And a lot of these elders don't feel like they have the strength to fight it, or they don't feel that they actually they believe in their insurance companies because they've been paying them for so long. They really believe that they would do them right. And that becomes a major issue with a lot of our claims with our elders. They really think that until it happens. So with that said, what would you like to leave our folks tonight for the thought of the night? On elders abuse?
I'm going to leave you with a little parable. I'll leave you a little parable of one of my favorite films. It's called My Name is Nobody. It had Henry Fonda. It has a little parable at the end. It tells the parable about on a cold and frosty morning in the early spring, a young bird fell out to the ground and was shivering and nearly dead. A cow came by and decided to take help on the poor little birdie. The cow covered up the birdie in a cow pie. And it was very smelly and warm, and soon the bird started singing because he was happy in the cow pie. And then warmer and warmer it got, he started singing more and more. About that time, a coyote came. And the coyote was attracted by the singing and jumped out from behind the boulder and snatched the birdie from the cow pie and ate it. So the parable of the story is, the moral of the story is that not everyone who shits on you is your enemy. And not everyone that pulls you out of the shit is your friend. So, that being said,
this ain't how it's supposed to end. I'm sorry. Oh my goodness. I am done for this one. I have more to say. I'm done. Oh man. Troy Willis out.
Corey Locke. Thank you again.
Oh my.
Thanks for listening to the Claims Underground podcast. We hope you enjoyed this segment. If you need more information on insurance policies, feel free to check out our website, www.claimsunderground.com. And remember, when the insurance companies won't pay, we're here to help. Until next time.